Well, look at there. I got people join me tonight. I'm always surprised when I come on Zoom and there's anybody here. How's everybody?
Hey.
Great.
Cool.
My volume's turned all the way up. It is. It's good to see everybody. I hope everybody's doing well. Amanda, I see Amanda's got her pride and joy with her. What a cutie. Well, I hope everybody's doing well. As everybody's joining us tonight, let's see what the book tells me here about what's been going on. So Carter is the new points leader this week because he finished his policy analysis evidence. He joined Kishona with that. So congratulations to Carter. And second place on points, Sarah, Laura, Brittany, Amanda, Kishona, and Robert. So the rest of you, pick it up. Let's not let's get those assignments turned in. I don't want to have to be sending out emails and sending out care reports and all that stuff. So make sure you get your work called up. Everybody's doing well. I don't have any complaints. Let's look at our weekly schedule and see where we are. We're on the back half of the schedule now. And so we are Zoom class 4. This week we have Essex chapters 4, 5, and 6, and I believe that is Christian, Brittany, and Chastity. So that's what we'll have tonight. We'll have 2 weeks off, and then we'll do uh, two Essex chapters in FERPA, and then we'll have our residency weekend, and then we'll be uh, another couple of Zooms or 3 Zooms, and then we'll be done. So we're here at our Essex chapters tonight on March the 4th. All right, so we know where we are. You should be somewhere around Part C of the policy analysis evidence. If you're not, pick it up a little bit. Make sure you get that in. Always make sure when you get done with me, you go take it to task stream and get it graded. You know that state portfolio for licensure, so it has to be in there when we upload your portfolio for licensure. Um, Next time we meet in 2 weeks, we'll figure out our breakfast menu for our last residency weekend, and we'll worry about that then. All right. I think that catches us up to where we are. I hope you all are progressing well with your dissertations. Laura, I think you are working with Dr. Van Cleve now. That's great. Laura has a real neat one in the hopper. I've worked with a lot of you. Don't forget, there's a link in our shell. If you want to hear an old man drone on more than you have to, you can always click and sign up for a time and come online with me. We'll talk dissertation. Um, Kind of get you pointed in an area, a methodology, clear path to data. We have to kind of figure out what data we're going to need, and if we can get it before we get too far into dissertation. That's if you don't want to work with me, that's fine. But I don't care who you work with. No data, no dissertation. It's just a book report. And so before you get too deep into this, you got to figure out. I was working with one yesterday, Monday sessions, and we decided that, no school district would let her do it, so we're going to have to try to do a snowball through Facebook. Well, that changes the methodology. You can't do a case study, you can't do a narratology, you can't do an ethnography. Um, you can't do any of that stuff if you don't have a bounded system. Well, if you do a Facebook, you don't know who your sample is. That's not a bounded system. Those are the kinds of things. So we got all the way down to the end on hers and said, my district won't let me do this. Well, all right, we're going to have to do something else. And we had to change your methodology. So now is the time to know those kinds of things before you get too deep. And we also need to be thinking about doing a prospectus with your district or where you plan to get a preliminary from them. Not you're not submitting a formal application, but you're asking them as if this is something that they would consider. We got to have that clear path to data. I can't say that enough times. You've heard me say that before, but somehow I always end up about every daily session I have, or every I have one person who's got a problem getting to data. Um, and it's it's widespread now. So be working on that, be thinking, be setting this up. Don't go down a real deep path here and then find out that you can't get there from here. And so that's my caution again. And again, I'll be glad to meet with you. We'll talk it over. Um, we can talk to your district. We can do some things, but let's figure out your data path before you get too deep into writing your chapters. All right. So it's time for our presentations. Again, on the board tonight, we have Christian with chapter 4, Brittany with chapter 5, and Chastity with chapter 6. And so let me go back to this and come back to y'all, and I will widen my screen. So, Christian, I see you're with us. If you're ready, you can share your screen. I'll turn my camera off to help you here. Makes
Absolutely.
a lot of people happy, even when somebody else isn't sharing their screen.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Lamb. I'm gonna get look at that. I can see y'all even as I'm presenting. That's nifty, but I don't really want to because then I can't see my whole slide. All right, good deal. So, chapter 4 in the Essex text was all about national security and school safety. It's really, and tonight I'm going to speak on it being an overview of those challenges in the modern era. Our school system in Lee County, it being a small school system, we kind of have made some advancements in our security across taking some stances policy wise, and then also just with our actual facilities and how we interpret the word school safety. So I've got some things related to case law that tie into this chapter, kind of sprinkled throughout this presentation. And it's not letting me. There we go. All right, so the first part of the chapter talks about the Patriot Act, the USA Patriot Act, No Child Left Behind, and school safety. So basically, just the overall access of student privacy or access to information that would impact student privacy. We all know if you're in North Carolina about the most recent Power School breach, which has become a popular conversation topic. I've had some parents call and want to pull their students' information from our SIS, which is not possible. They can't do that. But we can prove, show them that our current, we're with Infinite Campus now, but that we have all those things in line to keep those records safe. But we have to be able to have that information, those student records, and to record and I guess report those things to federal authorities. We regardless of parent consent. No child left behind in school security. So, the mandate of annual school safety reports, again, a lot of that feels like check boxes along the list. But if you mess any of it up, it's a big deal. Also it requires that schools adopt emergency preparedness plans and crisis management, whether that be having a site designated that if you had to leave your campus to come back together, having those kind of things ready in case of emergency. The last part related to this is just the legal obligations for schools regarding national security concerns. So the point that I want to just point out is that case law case in 2002. It highlights the balance between student privacy rights and school transparency, but just being sure that we are the mitigator as school leaders or district leaders in preventing the radicalization and reporting threats. So, kind of when those folks come to us, being the arbiter of that information and handling it appropriately. Up next, violence in schools. So, types of school violence that were covered in the chapter, physical altercations, gang-related violence, school shootings, weapons on campus, things like that. But then also, we know in today's day and age, cyber threats, social media fueled violence, whether it be a group text, a Snapchat message, something that goes out the night before, and the impact on how we have to respond to that and take it very seriously, whether it be a joke, whether it be something that students aren't actually meaning. But basically, I know Lee County High School was put on 9 to 10 lockdowns last year alone just because of a bomb threat that came from inside of our schools. And they actually were able to isolate the IP, find those students, and take, legal recourse against them because of that, taking it very seriously. The preventative measures that have been in place in terms of school resource officer, I know in Lee County we have at least one on every campus. We also have in some of our high schools we have more than one. And then just those updated security systems. We do have metal detectors at our high schools, and I'm sure many of you do that as well. And then just that limited entry point access of having the front entrance, having it be where students have to be coded in, badged in, things like that. And then again, just the trainings related to lockdowns, active shooter trainings, emergency response, and then on the back end of that and the front end, really providing enough notice where parents are aware and they are understanding that it's not maybe a true safety concern, but also not doing it so that it's something that others take advantage of if there were, a malicious intent there. And then when it ties into us as school administrators or district leaders, just the duty and care to ensure the safe learning environment. We know that's part of the free and appropriate public education. Liability in cases of failure to act on known threats. An example here in 1999 established that schools can be held liable under Title IX for student-on-student harassment if they show deliberate indifference. So if we hear about something, we don't act on it because we say, hey, that happened not on our campus. We're not responsible for it, things of that nature. If it does involve our students and it does disrupt the learning environment, and that can be a major thing. And I know a lot of students think they're maybe untouchable or out of the purview of the school system if they take those acts or do certain things off campus. But then if it comes back to our campus, then we are required to do a little bit of looking into that. All right. In terms of limiting liability for school violence, so this is something in terms of how districts can protect themselves and related to policy and things that can be put in place. So being sure that we document our safety protocols, that we practice those and market those to our school community. Being sure that staff and students are both trained in violence prevention, not only on campus, but when those things like threat or harassment take place off campus. Just having, we have the Say Something um, system that any student, any parent, any teacher, anyone can anonymously report. And it provides information on the details of what was going on and then gives us the ability to look further into that in an anonymous way. So that's one way Lee County handles that. Another portion of the chapter talked about just the importance of clear policies, being sure that we have a risk assessment that is proactively engaging to all stakeholders, being sure that we have policies on reporting those threats, bullying, and weapons, and then the safety audits. Again, I know a lot of those things feel like, hey, walking around our campus, being sure they're safe. We know that they're safe, but being sure that every access point is latching. Seasonal changes change the way doors close, and that feels like a small thing, but it can be a really big thing in case there's an emergency. Um, Another part that talked about, just in terms of this, that comes up frequently, I think, in today's society is just the concept of search. Um, we don't have to have the probable cause within a school. We have to have reasonable suspicion. So if there's reasonable suspicion, being sure that you take all precautionary acts, that those students can be searched. I searched a student today that was in a restroom when a vape detector went off. Had another administrator with me. The SRO was not involved in that process. He was in the general vicinity, but he was not in there. And then we do just the general no, nothing invasive, no anything like that, but just any belonging that was with them at the time. We did do that search. So the next case
Did you
study,
find anything?
we did not. It was very bizarre. She kept saying she didn't spray the aerosol deodorant that she had in her bag, and I said you had to have, in order to trigger that. And then she eventually ended up owning up that she did. It's like I guess she thought she was going to be in trouble for using like a perfumey smell. She was a sixth grader, so she was a little bit terrified. The mother was very upset that we did that search without. But I told her I said I'm calling you as soon as we've done it. I did want to let you know, and so we came to an understanding, but it was a little bit of a dicey situation there from
Hmm.
about 1 to 145. So in 2001, and I'd just like to point out that some of these case law examples are pretty dated, and I think it gives us some perspective on where we are today. In terms of there have been progress in certain areas, but there have also been areas in terms of the policy remains the same as it was, 40 years ago. And so I think that's just an interesting 40, 50 years ago, even to see some of these changes that really are just, the policy has kind of held up over time. So yeah, and then again in 2001, we all know in terms of the Columbine high school shooting, administrators were not held liable due to a lack of prior knowledge of the attack. Again, there is, an angle that everyone can take wanting to blame a school or hold them responsible for things, but that did hold up that, if there is some kind of an issue that takes place that there's no way we could have known. But we also know that there have been school shootings since then. If you think back to the ones where they did maybe have some information or the law enforcement on hand did not respond, maybe in the most, I guess, acceleratedly pursuant way, that kind of was blown up. And we won't get too deep into that, but that is something, that you think about. Okay, so of expression in school uniforms. This one was fun for me because if you look down the case study, it's from 1969. And I think it's interesting that some of the language that was present in 1969 is present in today's policy. So dress code related to school safety, again, I think it started out in a way that maybe was marginalized towards certain subgroups of students, but at the same time, I think it has evolved further in today's society. If you think about the political ramifications of what people consider to be disruptive to an educational environment, I think that gets really kind of dicey. And so I think it's better just to kind of be broad brush strokes rather than getting trying to pick out certain individuals or certain groups or things like that. I think that is where it can get messy. So students do have the right to express themselves through their clothing as long as it falls within the dress code of what is, modest and covering. But then also we have the ability to regulate something that my school did, which was I thought really challenging was we like made leggings not a thing. That was done before I showed up on the scene. And I'm gonna tell you right now, that is the most bizarre and challenging thing that they chose to do to regulate dress code. That had nothing to do, in my opinion, to safety or discipline. And so that was kind of an unnecessary step that they took. However, if there are things that are borderline offensive, whether it be a logo, a phrase, a politically motivated, we won't say it, but we all know what we're saying. In terms of our current administration, I think that has been something that folks have felt emboldened to wear proudly, and that can just create a disruption. So, in that, while they feel like maybe their rights have been violated, at the same time, we have to look at what does keep our learning environments conducive. So with drug testing and zero tolerance policies, this chapter really spoke to me. Our board's attorney really is he talks a lot about zero tolerance. They bring up zero tolerance related to hands-on contact, like, oh, we have a zero tolerance policy for hands-on contact, things like that. But then, we'll go through the slides in order. I'm kind of bouncing all over the place tonight. But so drug testing for students, random drug testing policies for student athletes and extracurricular participants, being sure that student privacy and school interest in preventing drug use. So, we can't like on site do any kind of drug testing or anything, or at least I know that we've never done that in my county, and I don't know of any other example where that would be a thing. But anybody that does have that, please feel free to speak up if that's ever been a thing. So I know parents have done that on their own accord in our district at times to prove that something was not in their child's system, and therefore, the THC vape that they were found with, they had not actually used. Um, but again, if they're found with it, they're found with it. So in terms of the zero tolerance policy, though, inconsistencies in enforcement. And as soon as mom number one hears that her child was zero tolerance for hands-on contact suspended, um, and then mom number two tells her in the grocery store that her student just got ISS for, pushing a kid, which is technically hands-on, you're gonna have a problem. And then again, I think it just does lend itself towards the criminalization of children. And that's a big no-no for me. When a teacher writes up something that sounds like they're filling out a police report, I try to make that a reflective conversation and say, hey, remember, they're the kid. They don't have the fully developed brain, and you do as the adult. So let's try and operate under such pretenses. Um, Now, the in the Board of Education versus Earls case law example related to discipline, it upheld suspicionless drug testing for students in extracurricular activities as constitutional. That was interesting to me because, again, that's never been something, and this was 23 years ago. So I would like to, if anyone has any perspective on that, and Dr. Lamb, maybe you could speak to it, if that's still a thing. But then obviously, we know that the 1975, that Goss versus Lopez, ensuring that students have that due process before we suspend them, even if we knew we did it. We have to have that conversation with them
Mhm.
to provide that before we act in any way. All right. All right. The next part of the chapter talked about student internet use, which I thought was interesting in terms of, yes, we have it on our school devices to filter things to be sure that it is appropriate. We also have programs like Go Guardian that supervise that student internet activity. Um, and then with the Children's Internet Protection Act, that mandates internet security policies and technology protection in schools. The tricky part is when they leave out, when internet is used outside of the school system or the server of the school related to school-based activities, whether it be communication with their peers, things like that. That's where things do get a little dicey. I did throw in here, though, that in Lee County, the policy references, I have these two documents, and I don't know if I click on them, and they're PDF documents. So I'm not going to click because I'm not sure that you guys can even see those when I click. But those two devices, the personal device usage guidelines and the internet acceptable use policy, those are two things that we have a bring your own device program in Lee County schools that if they want to bring their computer versus use one of ours, they are able to do that, but they have to join the internet on a secure server that is for our student internet only. And those have various filters and guidelines, and then can be used by that program that I mentioned earlier, Go Guardian, for teachers to be able to see what's there. And then that internet acceptable use policy, that's something that all internet users, not even just students, but also staff, we all have to agree and sign to that. I spoke to this a bit earlier, but just another part focused in the chapter about addressing cyberbullying outside of school. The challenges of this, determining the extent of school jurisdiction over off-campus behaviors. Again, folks saying, hey, that's not really in our purview because it's not on campus or it's not having to do with that. And balancing disciplinary action with students' First Amendment right. So if it's not a targeted thing, it's just a statement that somebody disagrees with or they feel a certain type of way about. That's not really something that we have jurisdiction over. However, if it is targeted at a student or something like that,
It
that absolutely,
disrupts the learning environment. The law says that. So
that's right.
where it happened, what machine they use, what device is immaterial. So, you know, in the 603 law class, we talk about a parent comes and reports that their child's being cyberbullied. And somebody says, well, why do we, well, that's a disruption. If that parent came and made a report that disrupted the learning environment, that means you got to handle.
That's right.
Now, a lot of people think that the cyberbullying law was repealed. It was not. There was one article in it that was repealed, and that was a Twitter war deal. If me and Laura got in a Twitter battle, and she's so much smarter than me, and she started winning, and I claimed she was bullying me because I started losing the Twitter battle, now that's the only thing that was taken out. If you engage, then you can't claim you're bullied. But all the rest of the articles of the statute still exist, and if it disrupts the educational environment, you got to handle it. I don't care that it's hard. I know that it's aggravating. I know all those things, but I can't tell you the number of people I've had come back and said, "Well, our school, we don't handle that. If we can't prove that it happened here, well, that's not the litmus test.
That's
Is
right.
this kid, is this happening to this kid? Well, yeah. Well, then that's the weight of the law. That's you got to deal with.
Right.
That's just a lot of administrators use this as a cop out. I
Right.
hope they know better and are just lying. I hope they're not lying and stupid. I hope they're just lying
Yeah,
when they
and
say we don't have to.
it is amazing, you involve two or three friends that were involved in that situation, what you can find, how many
Yes.
screenshots may have been taken and things like that. So it is not a screech to a halt to your day to be able to do that. And again, like you said, it impacts the learning environment for that one student. And that's enough. That's enough to be able to do those things and need to do those things. The bullying, so within our district, talking about a bullying and harassment policy that here's a quote from it: will not tolerate any form of bullying or harassment between students and or adults on our school campuses. And I have not directly, but I have heard tell of having to bring out this policy number with the adults. Um,
Yes.
and that is something that you can stand on, and it's always nice whenever you're bringing anything like this to an adult's attention to have that policy number slowly right there behind you. It emboldens your claim. All right, so here are some board policy and then also state legal references. So in Lee County Schools, this policy 4138 regulates the students' use of cell phones and other wireless communication devices aiming to maintain a safe and focused educational environment. We have a whole like screens down, minds up or something. I think that was a bit of a miss on the marketing. It kind of makes you think like, why is my mind up? That doesn't make sense. But and then the acceptable use policy outlines the guidelines and behaviors expected, again, with the school technology or personally owned devices on campus. And then, as we stated, the trickle off into the off-campus piece. And then in the state of North Carolina, talking about the cyberbullying definition and then the definition of bullying and harassing behavior. Something interesting I know you South Carolina folks, about your cell phone ban. I know that is currently floating through legislation in North Carolina as well. And so I'm excited to hopefully join you guys in that chaos. So I think that will be nothing short of it, but it seems like, South Carolina's not on fire or anything completely in that realm. And so I think that is something that, which, by the way, I just said South Carolina on fire, and that makes me feel bad because of the Myrtle Beach things that are going on. So if anyone knows anybody impacted by that, my heart goes out to you guys. Um, so lessons learned, things I learned from this chapter. Being able to balance security measures and then constitutional protections. I always say, and our district folks always say, like if you aren't quite sure about proceeding, make a phone call before you do, because you can always not do something rather than have to undo something that you can't undo. It's like that, it's not a possibility. And then this is the something that was reiterated, that zero tolerance is a bad phrase. If you say zero tolerance and then it's allowed in any way, shape, or form, there can absolutely be unintended legal and ethical repercussions from that. And so basically, the phrase "it depends," or addressing things on a case by case basis related to, we don't have an absolute 3-day suspension for X. We can say up to, you see the phrase up to a lot in policy and things like that, but that gives you that wiggle room. And then another thing that I feel like I learned to be able to apply is just that liability protection depends on proactive, well-documented safety measures. So being sure that we have everything documented so that even maybe your most aloof staff member doesn't slip up and make you have a headache. And then the implications for my school and district, and just things that you guys can also reflect on related to school safety and security. How does this impact policies in my district? Like, does your district, are they kind of out front runners that want to take a look at this? Or do they kind of look into the legalese and try to explain away things? Are current security measures legally compliant? So are things happening that you know or don't know that are legally or maybe not so legally compliant? And then what changes can improve safety and minimize legal risk? So again, I think slowing down, getting a second opinion on things like that, that's a big takeaway that I got from interacting with this chapter.
All right.
And where
If
are the
you'll go
references?
back to the very first slide and let's go through it, I want to hit a couple of notes here. And
Sure.
while I'm doing that, understand that Christian pointed out that zero tolerance violates federal law because it means kid doesn't get due process. And the Tinker case in 69 and then the follow-up case in 75 guarantees that kids get due process. So zero tolerance or illegal, you can't say if this, then that. So you always remember that. All right, go through your slides quickly. All right. FERPA, we'll cover that later. Oh, emergency preparedness plans. If you've been in 603 with me, you know that that you have to have an emergency plan. You have to have 3 evacuation plans, one on campus, one nearby, and one where you're completely evacuated. You should know what's got to be in your crisis kit. Emergency plan is part of that. In your crisis kit that's supposed to be under the front desk in your front office. If not, let me know and I'll put the crisis kit folder. But you had school laws, so you should know that one. Um, um, and so go to the next slide. We have to do our reporting in. So, Kristen, y'all have moved away from Power School,
Yes, we took the dive into Infinite
Infinite
Campus,
Campus.
which we
Yeah,
were told it was required, but learned it's not. So
not,
that's
but
unfortunate.
yeah, it eventually will be. So right now we're kind of split between Power School and Infinite Campus, but that is your official data collection where you have to report all these acts of crime and violence and all those things, and you have to report them to law enforcement. We've already covered that. But putting it again, I can't say this enough times. Putting them in a third party software is not reporting them to the state. Got to be careful about that stuff. Cyber threats, cyberbullying. Um, I would always involve the police in those because they have warrant powers. They can seize the devices, um, and you know we had one in my home community where I told you a high school boy was enticing middle school girls next door, sending naked pictures, and then he was blackmailing them to have sex with underage girls. He will be in prison for a long time, but the AP thankfully had been trained and got the police, and they were able to get his phone. Got a warrant and found all those things. And so you need to involve any kind of cyberbullying, you need to involve the police because they have more power than you do. Um, let's see, lockdown, active shooter, duty and care. Yes, you can be held liable. There's three standards for liability: misfeasance, malfeasance, nonfeasance. Misfeasance means that you did the wrong thing. You didn't intend to, but you did the wrong thing. You can be sued. Nonfeasance, you had a duty to act and didn't. You say, well, I didn't do anything. You're not Homer Simpson. Homer, what did Homer say? If you don't do nothing, you can't get in trouble. That's not true. And then malfeasance, you intentionally did the wrong thing. Um, and so those are the standards. All right, roll on through that. Violence prevention, forcing on threats, bullying, weapons, following up on bullying and cyberbullying. Don't say that it's somebody else's problem if it happened off your campus. If they bring it to your campus, you got to do it. Again, police have to have probable cause. We can do reasonable suspicion. Um, you know, Columbine happened in what, 97 or 99? I was high school principal when it happened.
It was 99.
And also when Jonesboro, Arkansas happened, and it was a bad time. Trust me, it was a very bad time. Um, and they were found innocent at the time due to a lack of prior knowledge of the attack. However, I'm not sure they'd be found innocent today. The standard is different today,
Yeah.
because I mean there were many reports of strange behavior, wearing overcoats. I mean there was a lot of stuff came out later that they should have known. They absolutely should have known. They chose not to know. They had a duty to act and didn't. You would lose today on this case. I can tell you that case that you they will lose. They would lose today. All right, moving on. Dress codes, gangs, right and stress themselves. Tinker. Again, Tinker started that kids don't lose their rights when they go through the door, so no zero tolerance. You have to due process them. You have to, give them a chance to provide. You have to present your evidence. You have to tell them what they're charged with. You have to have any witness statements. You have to give them the right to refute, to give their statement, to bring witnesses, the whole deal. And you can't just be if this then that, zero tolerance. If you did this, you get that. Can't do that. That violates federal law. That one right in front of us, right there. Move on to the next one. Random drug testing for now. The reason why you can randomly drug test kids is that after school activities are not they are optional. They're not required. They're not mandatory. Now you would never get away with that just standing at the front door drug testing kids coming in. Remember, make sure you see what it says. Extracurricular activities. You can do that, but you can't stand at the front door and do that. All right. And they again, Goss versus Lopez in 75 reaffirmed Tinker versus Des Moines in 69. Students have due process rights. All right, moving on. Software. Okay, I don't want to get into that at all.
Okay.
Um, that's going to be that changes daily. That's district to district. Just make sure you follow whatever policy your district has. I think that's about it. Yeah, you got to address cyberbullying. It doesn't matter where it happens. If it comes to your doorstep and you're made aware, then you got to deal with it. If you are made aware, you must deal with it. Otherwise, you'll get hit with nonfeasance. You had a duty to act and didn't. All right, because it says if it disrupts the normal learning environment, you got to deal with it. I think that's pretty much it. Just want to make sure I hammered those. Kristen, you did a great job. And I
Thank you,
just want
sir.
to hammer those points home again because those are the ones when I get calls, I got a call today. When I get calls from school administrators about this happened, it's always around those kinds of things that I used to have hair. I pulled my hair out over those kinds of things. You got to due process kids. There is no zero tolerance. Just because it's not going to be easy doesn't mean you can ignore it. They'll hit you with nonfeasance. You had a duty to act and didn't. If it disrupts your environment. If somebody comes to you and reports it, that's a disruption. You got to deal with it. Parent makes it, comes in, kid comes in. You got to deal with it. All right, Brittany's chomping at the bit. I like that. Good job, Kristen. That was really good. Really good summary. All right, Brittany, we're ready for you.
I'm sorry, I had to unmute real quick.
All righty.
I had chapter 5, the individuals with disabilities, and chapter 5 had a lot to cover.
Mm-hmm.
So I did my best to put in what was absolutely most important, and I'll just talk about the rest. In 1975, we had the Education for All Handicapped Children Act. It's referred to as Public Law 94-142. And this was put in place because Congress realized that 8 million children with disabilities were not being properly served, and over 1 million of those children weren't served at all that had disabilities. So we needed to put something in place so that we can make sure they receive services. So this law says that public schools must provide equal access to education for all students with disabilities. The schools must evaluate children with disabilities and create their individual education plan. Parents have to be involved in this plan, and it is a must that we provide them with the least restrictive environment at all times possible. It was amended a few times. So in 1990, it became the Individual with Disabilities Act Education Act, the IDEA, and that expanded to students 3 through 21 so that they would have the right to free and appropriate public education. It included substantial and procedural due process rights to make sure everyone was treated fairly in this process. It required the state to identify, locate, and evaluate all children with disabilities from birth to 21 unless they graduated before 21. It also established the least restrictive environment. It wanted to focus on that again. And in 2004, we revamped that act and it became the Individuals with Disabilities Education Improvement Act. And it also focused more on the FAPE, free and appropriate public education. With these laws, it is the state's responsibility to formulate a policy to ensure due process rights for students with disabilities. They must make a plan that includes goals, a timetable, personnel, facilities, and related services for students with disabilities. And the system has to allocate funds to go to local districts. Your districts also have to come up with a plan for their students with disabilities, and that plan must be available to the local community. Our state is required to provide an appropriate education. It does not have to provide a maximum education. There was one case where a little girl was thriving with her accommodations, but her parents wanted her to have an interpreter. They sued and they were found to not have to provide that interpreter for the child because she was excelling with what she had. We have to provide a least restrictive environment. And during the IEP process or the individual education plan process, we must determine what is the least restrictive environment so the students can be with their peers as much as possible. We later determined that students do not have the burden of showing that they can benefit from special education. So no matter where they are, they must be accepted and they must receive services if they have a disability. And in 2000, the National Council on Disability found that every state was out of compliance with the federal regulations around students with disabilities. So to some degree, every state was not doing exactly what they should have been doing. Requirements for special education: the teachers that are teaching special education must have a certificate and pass a state exam. They must have a license to teach special education specifically, and they cannot work on a provisional basis. They cannot not have those licenses required to teach, and they must at least have a bachelor's degree. And then on your IEP teams where you're establishing the plan for the students that are disabled, you must have the student present as appropriate. Sometimes it's not appropriate to have the student in the room. You must have a parent or guardian, and that can be in person or over the phone. You must have the LEA, which is the person that represents the local agency. You must have general education teachers and a special education teachers. And at times when you are amending the IEP, you may have a parent write in that they give permission for the general education teacher not to be present if it doesn't involve that particular general education teacher. And I jotted some notes down to touch here. The pre-referral refers to the teachers of said students. So before they are determined to have a disability, teachers will work in tiers, where in tier 1, they're teaching the whole class. And if they notice that the student is not excelling, they will move them to tier 2, where they provide interventions. And in those interventions, if the student does not excel, then that is when they will move on to the referral process. With our English language learners, we must make sure we are careful not to place them into special ed due to their English is their second language. So we have to make sure that because English is not their first language at home, that's not the reason why we're putting them into special education. Discipline, our students that have disabilities have some different rights. They can only be suspended up to 10 days before we have a manifestation hearing, which must determine if their behavior was because of their disability or not. And even if they are allowed to be expelled for the rest of that year, they also must still have their education put in place. So you have to switch to an alternative education assessment for them. The passage also got into restraints. There are chemical restraints, which I have never seen used, and I'm assuming we do not use in public education, but those are restraints that include medicines that can be administered if a doctor and a parent gives permission. There are also physical restraints, and you have to be careful. The person providing physical restraints should be licensed to do so. If they are not, a person that is licensed must evaluate the situation and contact the parent immediately. We have had cases in this chapter where some students have passed from those restraints. So we are trying not to use physical restraints. Also, isolating the student is not advised. If the student is isolated for a limited amount of time, the person that is doing the isolation must be watching the student actively, because there have been cases where the student unalived themselves during that isolation period. Alternative assessments are available to a low amount of students. Only like 1 to 2% of our students may use those alternative assessments. And even then, those students must have IEP that is reevaluated every year. For students that are not using the alternative assessments, they may have an IEP that is evaluated 3 times, every 3 years. And then length of a school year stood out to me. As a regular ed teacher, I wasn't too knowledgeable about the length of a school year. However, our students with disabilities can have an extended school year. So in the summertime, if we think the student will regress from going home over the summer, they can have extended school year where there's a teacher provided to work with them on services that they have been working on during the school year so that they won't show that sign of regression. And my lessons learned, through reading this chapter, I realized I should have been more properly trained while I was in the classroom, and explaining the nuances and how easily you can be sued for not following procedures for special education could be proactive to prevent those lawsuits. So going forward in my career, it is my intention to make sure I explain that to all teachers so that they can protect themselves and protect the students as well. Implications. Effective processes are necessary. We want to make sure we are effectively following the law and implement everything so that the student can have a free and appropriate education. And also recruitment of special education teachers are a top priority. Other teachers can, have a provision so that they can get in the classroom and fill in, but special education teachers must be qualified. So we want to make sure we hire them first. My question for the chapter was, how do we fund special education teachers, nurses, and 101 TAs? In South Carolina, specifically Chester, all of our personnel are covered by the district central funds. So my district fund those positions as well as all other teacher positions. And they do this to ensure adequate staffing. This is by board policy BBA. It is the responsibility of the superintendent to hire support staff and all staff, and the board has a responsibility to vet those people and approve them before they are announced to the public. Some pros and cons of that method of funding. One pro is that staff is covered, so the principal is not responsible for hiring the staff, hiring custodians, hiring bus drivers. That is handled at the district level. We have a hand in interviewing and choosing who we would like, but that is handled at the district level. One con to handling it at the district level is that we can't use funding to reduce class size. So if our class size is large and we have the funds to hire another person to make it smaller, we don't have the autonomy to do that.
All right. All right. Stop your share. It's time to play Quiz Bowl tonight. All right. You are all LEA reps in a school. All right. First question. What is an LEA rep in a school?
For special education purposes, they're the person in the meeting that has the final say if the team's not in agreement.
All right. So your first administrative job will be an assistant principal. Most likely you will be the LEA rep because nobody wants to do that. So here are the things that you need to know. All right. One of the things that Brittany said is that can't hire more people. Who pays for special ed, by the way? Is that
I mean, there's
federal
state and
funding, state funding, or local
Federal
funding?
funds.
Federal funding.
Federal. Now, can the local add more to that if they want to? Yes,
They
they
can.
can. But if they choose not to, they don't have to. All right. You're the LEA rep and you don't know something. Is it legal for you to pause the meeting until you can find out?
Yes.
Yes. If you don't know, now I think it was Snoop. Now, Renita that works with me, she's principal in Durham. She says it was Dr. Dre. I don't know. But what they said was, if you don't know, you better ask somebody. And so I think Snoop said it first, but I don't know. But you better ask somebody if you don't know. If you're the LEA rep and you're being asked to provide something in that meeting and you're not sure that your district pays for that or provides that, you pause the meeting and find out. Because if you agree to it, the district has to pay for it. And it may come out of your check, like a one-on-one or extended year or any of those things. You may have to pay for that. So if you don't know, you better ask somebody. All right. Next question. What are field notes and who should be taking them? What are field notes and who should be taking them?
Like the just the notes during the meeting of who
Yes.
says what's going on,
Yep.
and
Who
then
should be
it's
scripting
not
the meeting? Whose responsibility is it to script the meeting?
the LEAs. It can just be a teacher, an outside of the main teacher or EC teacher.
All right. The LEA rep is responsible. They may not be the one actually taking them, but you have to make sure that
Oh.
notes are being taken. Field notes.
Salem, it is the LEA.
Yeah. A lot of districts it is. But it's your
Yeah.
responsibility. Even if you're not the one that has to do it, you better make sure it's being done because you are responsible for them. That is correct. You are responsible for the field notes. Make sure you understand that. All right. We're getting ready to have a meeting. It's 3:30. School's just out. It's a little disrupted, but that's the time that the parent could come. And the gen ed teacher for this EC kid who's in the sixth grade, he's on the Wombat team rather than the Huckleberries, whatever the team names are in sixth grade. And you see another teacher that's coming down the hall. Now she's a sixth grade teacher. She's a gen ed teacher, but she's not on his team where the EC kid is. You're the LEA rep and you got to get this thing pulled off. Can you pull that regular gen ed teacher that doesn't teach that kid into that IEP meeting?
Best practice, no.
Yeah, my answer is
Technically, yes.
Best practice, no. Technically, no.
Well, well,
yeah.
You can be sued.
we've been doing some shady stuff in
Yes,
here.
you have.
Yeah.
I'll just go ahead and
Like,
say it. You're all guilty. I know it. You know it. But if they sue you under FERPA, you will lose, by the way. Hands down. It's a loser, folks. Do not postpone them if you have to. Don't grab reg ed teachers that don't come in contact with the kid because the parent will agree to it. The next day, they'll sue you for a FERPA violation, violating the kid's privacy. And they have every right to do that. Even if they agree, don't trust them. They'll pull your heart out and show it to you before you die. Don't trust them.
I got a question, Dr.
I
Lamb.
have a question.
Yes.
You said don't pull
So
the teacher. This is Charlotte. So if the teacher in a high school, if the teacher has taught the student before, but they're not currently teaching them that semester, can you pull that teacher?
I wouldn't, but you can. Because they've been exposed to the kid's educational record. See, that's the thing. They have to have been exposed to the kid's educational record. The problem with doing that is they don't know what the kid's doing now. They're just keeping a chair from flying up in the air. They're just ballast. They're just weight. They're not going to be any help. They don't know what the kid's doing now. Yeah, legally you can get away with that because they've already been exposed to the kid's record, but they won't be of any value in the meeting. And I would limit that. You need people who have standing, who know what's going on. That's a good one. What is CPI training and who should have it?
It's crisis prevention or something like that. That it has to do with restraint but also like de-escalating like crisis situations.
Yeah, but it's usually we refer to it as the physical part where you physically restrain a kid without choking them out like I used to. I used to put them to sleep all the time. I'd be in prison now. I would be. That was my go-to move. I cut their air off. It's amazing how much fight it takes out of them if you cut their air off. But you can't do that. I would have everybody on my faculty that I could CPI train to try to avoid lawsuits. You never know where those kids are going to be. That'd be something that I'd be really interested in making sure that I had everybody CPI trained. All right. Do you have to report seclusions or restraint to anybody? If a kid is restrained, yep, you sure do. That goes on you. That goes into power school. It has to be reported separately. So you have to keep a record of those. And one of the things that will happen is you'll get audited. If you have people who are doing restraints who weren't CPI trained, boy, will you lose a big lawsuit. That's why I'd have as many as I could. Child find. If you got a kid and you know he's an EC kid, but he's going over to the local charter school, do you have to provide him services?
You have a duty under child find to go through the process to initiate, even if you can't finish the process before they leave.
That is correct. So if you've got kids that are EC that are in your attendance district and they don't show up at your school, you do have to go through the process and find them. That is correct. I know that sounds crazy, but you need to read about child find. That's when you get blindsided because you were thinking we're providing adequate services for every kid in the building. You are, but you're responsible for some that aren't in the building. I know that sounds crazy, but you need to read about child find. That's the one will slip up and get you. And then the last one is this. If a kid create a violent infraction and you do a manifestation determination and ODET 5, all the things that functional behavior assessment, updated IEP, psychological, all those kinds of things. All right, you got 10 days where you change this placement before you have to go through that, unless it's a severe one where you get him 10 days all at one time. All right, here are the questions around that. Does in-school suspension count against his 10 days? Vonda says no. I saw her shaking her head.
It's
Yes or no?
no.
I
I would
know.
say
Yes, it
Yeah,
does.
it
oh,
takes
does
them
it?
out of their least restrictive environment.
All you have to, here's the litmus test. If you change the kid's placement or not. If you change his placement, whether it's in school, doesn't. If his butt is not in his regular seat, that's a change of placement. I don't care if he's in the room next door. That rolling deal with PBIS, where you bounce them from one room to the next, that's a change in placement. Anytime his butt's not in his regular seat, that counts against his 10 days. Now, what is the magic number on repeated offenses that negates the 10 days? There's a caveat to the 10 days as well. He don't get 10 days under what circumstances? Some circumstances he only gets 3 days. 3. What would that be? Why would in the world would you have to go to a manifestation termination after only 3 days? Pattern of behavior. Third time a kid fights, if he's an EC kid, he goes to the front of the line. He gets the manifestation of termination. He don't get 10 days. If the kid was repeating the same behaviors 3 times, well, I only gave him 1 day suspension so I could, so you're saying you're going to let him fight 10 times before you do anything? Well, yeah, that's a lot of paperwork. No. You will lose that lawsuit. Another kid gets hurt. Third time kid, fourth time, fifth time kid gets in a fight and he hurts somebody and he's shown a pattern of behavior and you didn't do anything to try to change his placement. The parents of the victim will sue you and win. So a kid gets change of placement up to 10 days. Then you got to do a manifestation termination for the most appropriate placement. Unless they're showing the same pattern of behavior. On the third time they repeat the same behavior, they go to manifestation termination. That's the law. You better know it. You're going to be the LEA rep if you're not now. You better know those things to protect yourself from lawsuit. So those are all the hot button ones. The 90 into the 90. Everybody knows what that means now, where they do MTSS for 90, and then there's 90 days in EC before a decision is made on testing. You can't just say, well, we tested that kid. Even if the parent comes and requests it, that doesn't mean you have to do it. You should do the 90 and the 90 and put them through the process. Again, you're opening yourself up for a lawsuit if they change their mind, even though they're the one that requested it. If you don't put them through the process, you can be in trouble. All right. That's our quick and dirty on EC tonight. Our last presentation.
All right. Is my screen? Okay, so is my slides just showing? Because I don't see anybody.
Yep.
Okay.
And it's also doing
The top
closed
thing,
captioning of what you're saying too.
I don't know how to get that off. No. Is it in note view or is it just the regular presentation?
No, it's in notes.
Presentation view. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, we can see what you see. We can see presenter view.
There you go.
That's good.
Oh, All right. All right. So I had chapter 6, which is on school personnel and school district liability, which is fun, fun, fun. Um, so the first highlight is the school, of course, should be viewed as a safe place. Um, so schools, of course, we know what was mentioned, I think, in one of the last presentations about loco parentis, but schools have a legal responsibility to maintain a safe environment. And I took this directly from the book that educators have been assigned 3 legal duties when by the courts under in loco parentis, which of course you know means in place of parents, and that is to instruct, to supervise, and to provide for the safety of students. Um, it's our duty, of course, to protect students from foreseeable harm, and I think I'll talk about what is foreseeable a little later. And then, of course, implementing safety measures to prevent injuries and conflicts. Good. Okay, and of course, liability for school personnel. So teachers and administrators can be held liable because I know Dr. Lamb says this all the time that they will come for our house or our money or our jobs for actions of or negligence. Cases of failure to act in preventing harm. There were several that were in the book. I want to say there was like a case of like sexual misconduct. There was another case of like somebody getting on a bus stop waiting and got um, a slingshot or like a rubber band and they hit another kid waiting. So of course there is no defense for a failure to act, especially for things that you know are coming. The liability at bus stops, of course, the bus is viewed as an extension of the school, so there's still some sort of liability there, which means that student conduct rules still apply. Schools must also establish and enforce clear technology use policies to prevent liability issues, which is kind of piggybacking off of what Christian was talking about with it being a disruption. So of course, individual liability is not usually does not usually occur unless the plaintiff can demonstrate that a school employee's actions actually violated a clear law and that the employee exhibited like a recklessness or like blatant disregard for disregard. I also put in what foreseeability is. Of course, it's defined as like the ability to foresee something coming, like where you know that something or a certain activity could be harmful to students. Um, Another term that was in here was like a nuisance. Of course, that's like a dangerous or hazardous condition that limits like free use of property. Then they went into a bunch of different things like what an invitee is, like that's somebody who's able to come to the school by invitation. Then you have like, of course, trespassers are people who are not supposed to be there or have consent to be on school property. Intentional and unintentional torts was the next key thing in the book. A tort, of course, is a actionable or civil wrong committed against a person. Would you have intentional ones? Could be, for example, assault, battery, false imprisonment, defamation. I put defamation twice. I don't know why. Malicious prosecution. And then we have unintentional torts, which is like negligence due to a lack of duty or care. And of course, the importance of preventing harm through proactive policies will circumvent all of this. But one of the things that they pointed out in the text is assault and battery, of course, which it tends to happen a lot at schools because the kids, all they really know nowadays is like fight. So the difference between assault, of course, is like when you tell somebody I'm going to do something to you, and battery is when you actually make contact with someone. And of course, if a student gets injured, then they may file a suit against school personnel if it happens with another student and adults or anybody knew that it was getting ready to happen prior to like the actual physical attack. So of course we have to be very mindful and conscientious of like what we hear the kids say, like take all threats serious. Another thing that came up is defenses for defamation and negligence. One of the things that the text talked about was being mindful of like being in what is it, live, like teacher lounges, because a lot of, we call it water cooler talk happens there, and you want to be mindful of what you're saying. So it says the most common defenses cited against defamation, of course, is always telling the truth, have good faith, and privilege. And you have to prove like whatever you're saying was not malicious intent. So of course, defamation, we all heard it before. It occurs when someone makes a false statement about another person. And then there are two kinds of defamation, which is, Dr. Lamb, is this right? Like libel and slander. Did I pronounce that right?
Yes.
Okay. And then, of course, slander is considered oral, while libel is considered written defamation. The next piece is negligence. Of course, we kind of know what it means to be negligent, but for you to prove that there's negligence, there are 4 requirements. The first one is standard of care. The second one is breach of duty. The third is proximity of legal cause. The fourth, injury. And the defenses that against negligence is, of course, following policy, reasonable care, and assumption of risk. And I kind of broke down with each one. So if you wanted to know what like standard of care means, like the teacher or principal owed a legal duty to protect students by conforming to certain standards. Breach of duty is when the teacher or principal failed to meet these standards, which is like the duty of care. The proximity of legal cause is the student must be able to demonstrate the proximate cause, like that the causal relationship existed between the breach of duty and the actual injury. And then, of course, the injury, the student must prove actual injury based on the breach of duty by like the teacher or the principal. All right. One of the next highlights in the book is proper instruction, student safety, and supervision. Of course, teachers must always provide clear safety instructions, like when students are in the classrooms, and say you're in science class and you have to provide safety instructions if they're dealing with certain things. Of course, supervision is crucial to prevent injuries throughout the school building. Supervision came up a lot because, of course, it is we're held liable before school, during school, after school, on field trips, anything that's, again, an extension of the school, on buses as well. And of course, we are liable for anything improper or negligent supervision. So teachers, again, have a legal duty to instruct students on proper use of equipment. All teachers and administrators are expected to provide reasonable supervision. And of course, we know that the degree of supervision just depends based on each situation. It's not going to always be the same, but we know, like, say, field trips, they require, I guess, a heightened supervision because you're unfamiliar with like where you're going and what may lie, like what opportunities may lie. So we have to increase supervision on field trips because you don't know. It's not like the buildings or the school, like the school you're in. It was important to note that courts generally do not expect school personnel to provide supervision after the school day has ended unless the kids are involved in like school-sponsored activities. However, common knowledge, you still have to use common knowledge and awareness when students are left on campus and they require like certain precautionary measures and personnel to cover it. And I think that's it for this one.
All right.
All right. So the lessons I learned, of course, is awareness of school liability is critical because I think you preach it the most, that they will come for our houses and cars and our livelihood and our jobs, and not to get caught slipping. I also learned that teachers must exercise reasonable care in everything, and we have to be proactive to adhere to policies to reduce legal risk. The other part that I noticed is that in the text, it kind of mentioned that educational malpractice has emerged over the years with people wanting to, file suits about instruction and having, I guess, inadequate teachers, which was crazy to me. But Yeah. So implications for my school and my district, I think that it needs to be a continuous legal training for staff. I don't think anybody was ever told to read a handbook, but just because you were like you not familiar does not excuse you. I think we need clear policies on safety, supervision, and liability. The school that I'm at, we have procedures per se, but I don't think they're always followed. And I work at the alternative school, which irritates me to the utmost because I think a lot of times people get lax in their supervision. And I was like, and I preach all the time. It's just we're only like one incident away from making the news. So I think it's very important. I think policies should be updated and reviewed because when going through my handbook, the district handbook, there are stuff so outdated, like the policy I'm working on for the class, it hadn't been changed since 2014. And a lot of the things that's in there don't even exist anymore. And they only existed for like 1 year. So I think that it's important that things be updated, and that we document incidents properly to protect like school personnel. And of course, the biggest thing, supervision will reduce a lot of incidents and foreseeable situations. Now the question I was asked about teacher dismissal, have I ever had a teacher fired at a school? I put yes and no. He was a teacher's assistant, which is classified. However, the reason he was fired was because he was asleep on the job, like mouth wide open, lean back in the in the chair. And it was a repetitive thing. Um, I later found out he was allowed to resign so that he could go find another job somewhere else and sleep, which was crazy. Um, the policy that was used is we have a policy code for 116.11, which just goes into suspension, demotion, dismissal, and of course, classified employees are employed at will. However, the only people that can really dismiss them is the superintendent, assistant superintendent, and the director of HR, but it's based on the recommendation of the principal, of course, or their supervisor, and that's what happened. Um, and then, of course, now teachers are different. So school administrators and teachers and other career employees, we are governed by this North Carolina General Statute. All right, last one, I think. So of course, my board policy reference is the one I just mentioned here. And the due process, of course, in any situation, for this is for just teachers and career employees and everybody else. The administrators have to inform everybody of the due process, and we have a policy where they can ask for like an appeal or hearing or review. And then our career employees shall be informed. But again, it says that they do get due process based on based on the law or statute. I'm sorry.
North and South Carolina are both tort liability states. Let me say that again. North and South Carolina are both tort liability states, which means that the district can be sued and you can be sued as an individual. Now, South Carolina caps that reward at $300,000. North Carolina does not. There is no cap on how much you can be sued for individually. So, um, the key point, I'm reading this directly out of the law. Um, Even if the school district is protected by insurance, individual school employees can still be sued personally if their actions are found to be negligent. That would be what would be make them be considered a tort liability state. So that's why I talk about losing your house. The insurance covers the district. It does not cover you. Or even if it does cover you, they can separate from you. The last case in Charlotte Meck, the district petitioned the court to have the principal that was charged separated from their liability, and he had to stand on his own because they considered what had done or was charged with not in his scope of employment. That's the rule in there as well. So understand Misfeasance, you did the wrong thing. Malfeasance, you intentionally did the wrong thing that harmed a kid. Nonfeasance, you had a duty to act. And if a kid is harmed, you can be sued and you can lose your personal property. I told you there's 3 assistant principals out in Washington State that are being charged criminally as well for failure to act in a sexual harassment, sexual assault case. They didn't report it. So the malpractice, the negligence, the malpractice part where you intentionally did the wrong thing, that can be considered not only civil and lose your house, but you can lose your freedom. That can be considered criminal as well. You've got to understand that. Now, Chastity brought up a good point. They had somebody sleeping on the job and they let him resign rather than be fired. Okay. But what if he had been sexually harming children and they let him resign? And he went over to the next school district and got a job and he harmed a child over there. And it became known that y'all knew that and let him resign rather than firing him and charging him. Would you be liable? Could that school district or that child sue you? Of course. So one of the things, if you ever get to the HR division of your school, one of the things you've got to remember is if the guy's sleeping, you know, maybe there's not a lot of harm in letting him resign, but there's certain things you cannot just say, well, this person resigned, we're not going to pursue this. Because if it happens again and you didn't take action, you had a duty to act and didn't, and get that person's license removed, that's going to come back on you. That's going to come back on you. Now, I had a student. Her picture was actually one of the ones that you saw the last time that we were together. She took a teacher, not this fall, but last fall. She took a teacher. And when she transferred from another building. She had worked with her years ago, knew that she was a good teacher, everything was good. Principal said, yeah, valuations were good, let her transfer. The teacher showed up. She probably weighed 100 pounds soaking wet, had lost all of her teeth, was a terrible meth addict. And one of her fellow principals did that to her, passed the trash, didn't document, didn't do anything. And when she got her, she immediately had to suspend her and put her in rehab. And you know what happens? That you can't even hire a long-term sub. I've had that happen to me in Charlotte. I had a crack addict that I inherited, and she went off, and she slipped off the wagon shortly after I got there. I went 8 months with no teacher in that room. Because I had to deal with that. But that principal, if I had been her, she was a lot better person. The least of his worries is what I would have done legally in terms of the fit out of pitch. But me and him, one of us had went home with a whipping if he'd have done that to me. Might have been me, but he would have had to proved it. But that's what I'm talking about. You must follow through. You can't just let people resign. You can't walk away. Then you're being negligent. If you do those things from a personnel standpoint, you need to follow through on whatever the fullest extent of the law is to protect yourself down the road, because these people are going to go find another job and they're going to continue their behavior. That's that's my sermon for the evening is it's not about being ugly or rude or vindictive. This is about protecting you and yours. If you don't follow through and you let these people go and they harm somebody else, you're going to feel bad, one. But number two, you're going to feel a whole lot worse when you're in court and you lose all your property. All right. Anybody have anything for the good of the group this evening? That was 3 excellent presentations. I wanted to highlight some of the things that I see most commonly from the calls I get from school administrators with questions or issues that they have. The EC is a hard one. I know we do things in EC that because we've always done them, but as I always say, it's always fun and games till somebody gets their eye put out. until somebody sues you. And even though your school might have been acting in that way for years and years, when it's court, that won't matter. It will not matter. These are all things to take under advisement, especially since most of you at some point in your career is going to be the LEA rep in a school or going to be involved in this. And again, you better know what your job is. It's not just to organize the meeting and find a room to put everybody in. You have a lot of responsibility as an LEA rep for EC. That's the one that's the most involved and the hardest and the one you need to know the most about. All right. Anything before we go this evening? All right. I'll see you in 2 weeks. Everybody be good. Thank you. Get your work in. Bye-bye.